Bearing, you say? Yes, I'd be perfectly happy to talk about Bearing. It was my misfortune to first encounter Bearing in the autumn of 2014 when he was attached as part of the entourage of Dame Edna Everage. Now, Dame Edna, as you know, requires regular infusions of honey and lemon to maintain her sweet singing voice, and for reasons of diversity they had employed Bearing as guardian of the honey. Now, I'm not racist, but putting a bear in charge of the honey seems to me to be a bad idea, and it's unfortunate to report that this did indeed lead to what the rest of the entourage referred to as that unfortunate stickiness. So in the wake of this scandal, I was asked as a favour to Dame Edna, whom I know quite well, to keep Bearing out of trouble. So I invited him to my club for dinner. He turned up stark, bollock naked, apart from a collar, tie and cuffs. And furthermore, he seemed proud of the matter, and he thought my stare of amazement was one of admiration, and promised he'd fit me up with a full yogi next time I happened to be in Woomera. It was quite distressing, but we're British, everyone just pretended it wasn't happening, and we carried on about our evening. So Carstairs comes over to our table and asks us what we'd like to eat, what we fancied. I had my usual roast beef. Mr. Bearing prevailed upon Carstairs to provide him with, let me see if I have this straight, flaming roux testicles in a Foster's reduction. Carstairs would do his best, but it turned out just as he was ready to turn away from the table, Bearing spoke up again and informed Carstairs that, "Nah, mate, I'm just fucking with you," which didn't go over too well either. Furthermore, what he then asked for in apparent seriousness was a pie floater, which frankly I'd have gone for the flaming roux balls. After the disaster of dinner, we retired to the games room for a few hands of poker and a few drinks. Bearing had scotch with ice, because he's a barbarian, little more than a savage. We played a few hands, and I'm afraid he shows no restraint in poker as he does in anything else. And as such, he was bluffing and overbetting on every hand, and I'm afraid I succumbed to my baser instincts and took him to the fucking cleaners, as they say. When it came to the final hand, he couldn't pay, and so in lieu of payment, he offered me a night of passion with his good lady sugar tits. Well, I couldn't refuse for propriety's sake, so I'm afraid I had to agree. Imagine my shock later that night, having forgotten about the whole messy business, to hear a loud crashing and roaring from my front door. When I answered it, who was there but Bearing, with two pink ribbons tied around his ears, desperately trying to convince me that this was, in fact, the eponymous sugar tits. Well, I was having none of that, and I shut my door and returned to bed. A most shocking incident, as I'm sure you agree. Still, perhaps we should not be too surprised. After all, it's well known that Australian colonials are almost all descended from the criminal element, and Bearing is no exception. He's descended from an ancestor called Herring, who was deported to Australia in 1793 for the crime of buggering a lamppost in Paddington. It seems the apple has not fallen far from the tree. To cut a long story short, with no more circumlocution, verbiage, or unnecessary waffling, it's clear, I think, to see that Bearing is a cad, a bounder, a barbarian, an uncivilized beast. In short, a cunt.